Not quite sure, so I'll cover it by going blah 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 blah. But I think we're live. So, ladies and gentlemen of the Facebooks, YouTubes, and all the other channels we're out on, welcome back to another 10K Collective podcast live. We are here today with a good friend of the podcast, a good friend of mine, Nathan Hirsch, who's Mr. Entrepreneur. Since I've known Nathan, he's now created his third business in the e-commerce space. And that business is all about bookkeeping, which is kind of a mundane thing to deal with, but I believe it was in response to your clients, wasn't it, Nathan, that you took it on?
Yeah, I mean, I tend to like unsexy businesses, but things that are essential to businesses that I've started in the past. So I've tended to stay in the hiring space, now in the financial space. And if you look back on things that have gone well or things that have gone poorly, it really has come down to great hiring or poor hiring or understanding the numbers and great financials or vice versa. So
Yeah, that makes sense. So in a way, it's still within your normal your expertise in the sense that it's all still about people, right? So bookkeeping is a mixture of people and systems, I suppose, and we'll talk about that in depth in a second. So if you are watching live or on the replay, don't forget that this is an interactive medium, unlike a podcast, which is one reason we do the lives. So do leave any comments, and I will get them. Try and make sure the comments are all about bookkeeping, please. Not should I start a retail art business? That's not the place to ask that. Not today. But if you have any questions about the bookkeeping side of things, for Nathan or for myself, then do pop them in and we can weave them into the show if it's relevant. Otherwise, we'll come back to you afterwards on one of the channels. So that said, Nathan, we are going to do our usual thing and record our podcast live. So are you good to go? You're watered
I'm
up
good to go.
and
I just shared it in what places that I could, and I'm ready to rock.
fantastic. Let's do this thing then. Here we go. Ladies and gentlemen of the internet, welcome to the 10K Collective podcast, the place to be for 6, 7, and 8-figure Amazon sellers. So, we are here today talking about a really important, if mundane, topic, which is bookkeeping. A lot of people I know have struggled with this in the e commerce space who are otherwise excellent at marketing. I know I've literally seen one of my friends get a nosebleed from trying to deal with his finances once in a mastermind meeting I was a member of. That's how bad it can get. But even if it doesn't result in physical injury, it's certainly a topic we've got to address. Nathan Hirsch is our guest today, a massive overachiever in the e-commerce space. He's now on, I think, his maybe fourth business in the space, having sold millions on Amazon and then sold a business a while ago as well. So, Nathan, warm welcome back to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Hopefully, I can continue to add value to your audience.
Absolutely, I'm sure you can. So we ought to just get a quick check-in with you. Obviously, a lot of people in the e-commerce space will know you by now because you've been out there doing a lot of different things, but just a 1-minute version of who you are.
Yeah, so I started selling on Amazon back in 2008, 2009. Sold about 25 million in the early days of Amazon from 2009 to 2015. Drop shipping a lot of baby products and toys from my college dorm room. If you can imagine me with more hair, a single college guy selling baby products. And from there, I scaled that business using a lot of virtual assistants and freelancers. I was young, so hiring people in the US, hiring college kids was very difficult. So I got into the VA freelance space early, used that to launch FreeUp, a marketplace for e-commerce sellers to hire pre-vetted VAs and freelancers. We started that with $5,000, scaled it to do around 12 million the last year before we sold it at the end of 2019. It was acquired by one of our clients. The acquisition went great. We have a great relationship with the new owners. And since then, I've launched and I'm running two businesses. One outsource school, which I've talked about in the podcast before, which teaches our hiring processes and the same process we use today to hire our entire team. And our newest business, which we launched at the end of last year, early this year, ecombalance, which we're trying to design the easiest monthly bookkeeping service out there for e-commerce sellers. So that's really been my main focus now on outsource school and ecombalance.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a huge admirer of the way you do things because you really cut to the chase. You've been somebody I've reached out to on multiple occasions for my own business, for client businesses, and so you're good at getting stuff done, but also stepping out of the picture and getting other people to do the bits that you don't want to keep for yourself, which is most of the business. You're pretty good at making time for yourself and your family, and so I think that's the dream that a lot of stressed e-commerce operators have. And obviously, hiring a bookkeeper is, getting one of those essential things off your desk. But today we're going to talk specifically about some of the errors that you're seeing Amazon and e-commerce operators making with their bookkeeping, right? Because obviously, if you do the outsourcing business, process rather badly, then it's not going to add to your joy. It's going to add to your stress, right? So, what impact, first of all, before we get into the detail, what impact do you see errors in bookkeeping or relationship with bookkeepers having on e-commerce operators' businesses?
Yeah, so I want to kind of start at a high level. So this is kind of my overall mentality on being an entrepreneur and doing bookkeeping. So first of all, there's no situation that you should be doing your own books as an entrepreneur. First of all, it's just not a good use of your time. Your time is better spent launching new products, marketing, sales, growing your business, getting on additional marketplaces, whatever it is. And second of all, most entrepreneurs are just not good at bookkeeping, especially e-commerce bookkeeping, which ends up being some of the most complicated compared to other businesses. So most of the time that I see entrepreneurs trying to do their own bookkeeping, it just has to be redone anyway by someone else. And cleanup work is a lot more expensive than actually just getting a good bookkeeper from day one. And so that's kind of my take on anyone who's listening, who's trying to do their own books or thinks that they're going to take a course on QuickBooks and be able to do that. That's just the wrong mentality when it comes to it. Now, your bookkeeping setup, you don't need to know every little thing about bookkeeping. You don't need to know the ins and outs of QuickBooks. You don't need to know every single tax law. What you do need to have is a good system in place where every time a month ends, you get your reports, your income statement, your balance sheet, your cash flow by the 15th, the 10th, the 15th of the next month. And you should have a meeting on your calendar every single month, a meeting that's not missed between you and your business partner, you and your team leaders, you and your bookkeeper, whatever makes sense for your setup, where you go through these statements and you make decisions for your business based on what the numbers are actually telling you. And this is something that Connor and I have done every single month going back 6 years now for all of our companies. We're not the ones actually doing the bookkeeping, reconciling the accounts, but we do get these reports and we do go through them together every single month. So that should be your process. It should be on autopilot. You should be able to repeat it every single month. And from there, you should kind of have the mindset of the right tools. So for e-commerce sellers, QuickBooks and Xero should really be the only two accounting softwares you should consider. Now, there's other softwares out there like Wave, which is free. And I would argue that it's free for a reason. And at some point, you're going to have to go to some of the major tools like QuickBooks or Xero. Those are the two I recommend. That means not keeping track of your books in Excel and not using the other free softwares out there. And lastly, and I'll let you jump in, for whatever reason, Amazon and other platforms make it very difficult to get accurate numbers into QuickBooks. So you have to have a connecting tool. A2X is the one that we use. We spent the first 90 days of ecombalance testing every possible connection tool out there. And for whatever reason, A2X is the one that gets the most accurate information consistently with the least amount of bugs. So that should be your overall setup, the mentality that you shouldn't be doing your books, that it should be on autopilot every month with that monthly meeting, and that you need to use either QuickBooks or Xero with a connector like A2X.
Nice, as usual, delivering really to the point value as ever, Nathan. So, just a quick revision of that: have a process as a business owner, but don't do your own books. And yeah, the right tools definitely important. Yeah, I've used Wave, I've used QuickBooks, I've used Xero. I can attest to what you're saying. Wave is free for a reason. It kind of looks okay up to a point, and then it breaks down. The other tool set that's quite useful if you're UK based, I have to say, has been Link My Books, which deals with VAT, possibly a bit better than A2X. Is that something you guys have tried out as well, or have you found that it's just not quite as accurate as A2X?
Yeah, so it's okay from an accuracy standpoint. I don't believe it connects to as many marketplaces as A2X, which is an issue for us since we're a bookkeeping service that deals with a lot of e-commerce sellers that sell all over. So I'm not saying A2X is the only tool out there that you can use, but there's some newer tools out there that aren't necessarily worth your time to try and test and figure out all the bugs. I would use an established tool that's been in the space that can get you accurate numbers.
Yeah, and the only reason that I would probably hold a candle bit for Link My Books is because I know the two guys who founded it, and they're both super sharp and very practical entrepreneurs. So I think for UK based or European based, if you sell on Amazon specifically, it might tip the balance. But yeah, A2X I've also used, pretty solid tool. I'm with you there. Okay, so we got the setup then. So let's assume that you've got a bookkeeper. and that you're, working towards or hoping to get that monthly accurate set of figures, and that you're going to actually be wise enough to be guided by the data. So what are the errors that you see people doing in terms of their bookkeeping when they are, let's divide it up. Let's say, what are the errors? We talked about the error of doing it yourself. So I guess we've dealt with that, knocked that on the head, and using Excel. So we've dealt with those two. What are the errors you see when people are trying to do it in a bit more of a grown-up way? There's still presumably ways to screw it up, right? What are those ways?
Yeah, a big one, and this is why I use something like A2X, is people will take the net that's deposited into their bank account, and that'll be the top line on their income statement. When really the top line on your income statement should be the total sales on Amazon, and then subtract fees and returns and stuff like that in order to get you the gross. So making sure that if you work with a bookkeeper and they're using the net that's going to your bank account as the top line on your P&L, that's a big red flag that they don't really understand e-commerce. So that's one part of it. Another big mistake is doing cash basis. So Joe Valley, who I think you know from Quiet Light, he talks about this a lot in his book Exitpreneur. If you really want to get a good picture of how your business is doing, you need to have accrual versus cash basis. So cash basis means every time a charge goes on your credit card, every time money comes into your bank account, that's when it goes on your books. Accrual is when you actually enter into the agreement. So if you're gonna buy something from a vendor, let's say, even if you don't pay them right away, it would still go into your books if you're using accrual. If you're owed money, that would go into your books even before you receive the money. That's the way accrual works. And the reason that's important is, let's say that you buy $50,000 worth of inventory in January. If you do cash basis, that's going to be a pretty large expense in January, which is going to show you maybe a large loss or a small profit. But then maybe your next month show much bigger numbers because there isn't that $50,000. And at the end of the day, that doesn't really tell you enough about your business. You need to either have it display in the month in which you sell the product, or you can do cost of good averaging, which is very common, where you would take that $50,000 and average it over, let's say, the next 3 months that you're selling the product. And that actually gives you a much better sense of what you're making. And more importantly, if you go to sell your business down the line, you're going to get a much higher multiple if you're doing accrual basis versus cash. The other thing that's incredibly important is segmentation. If you're selling on different marketplaces, let's say it's Amazon US, Amazon Europe, Amazon Japan, you want to know how each marketplace is doing. Same thing with different SKUs. You might be selling 5 SKUs and only one of them is profitable, and you're wasting a lot of time, a lot of money on 4 SKUs that you're losing money on, but you don't know because your books aren't segmented and you're just looking at the net of what you're making. So those are some common mistakes that we see.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And it's not easy to do, actually, in my experience. I mean, cash basis accounting, obviously, that's not so hard to achieve with QuickBooks or Xero, which both will produce things in accrual basis, right? But I have to say that there was one of our mastermind members who, in dollar terms, probably did about $10 million in their last financial year that I'm aware of, and they only just switched over to accrual basis accounting. And that business has been around for about a generation. So some people leave it a long time, don't they? Is that because it's harder to do accrual basis accounting, do you think? Or what do you think's behind sticking with cash for longer than you should as the basis of accounting?
Yeah, so there could be a few reasons. It could have to do with the bookkeeping or bookkeeping service. I mean, there's lots of what I consider a bulk bookkeeping service out there, like Bench.com, that only does cash basis. They won't do accrual. If you're a real e-commerce bookkeeper and you know what you're doing, you're able to do accrual. And QuickBooks has settings where you can easily go back and forth between accrual and cash. The kind of overall mentality with bookkeeping is it's always best to kind of make moves now. A lot of people want to delay, whether it's switching from cash to accrual, or maybe it's just getting your books into QuickBooks or cleaning up that mess that your last bookkeeper created. And the longer you stall, the longer you delay, the more expensive it becomes, the bigger the project comes. And it's always the best idea to just focus on it now. Pay that fixed price, get a good bookkeeper in there, set up the processes. There's very few people that get their bookkeeping set up and regret doing it, even though it might cost a little bit of time and money up front. It's going to save you tons of time, tons of money down the line, and can even make you money when you go to sell your company and you have all your books in order. I know when we went to sell Free Up, we had 4 years of immaculate books from the day we started the company up until when we sold it. And we knew our numbers very well. We had numbers for everything. Every time we were asked a question during due diligence, we were able to quickly deliver an answer. And that's one of many reasons we were able to get through the due diligence process.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's very short-term thinking. And you're right, there's always so many things to do on there. So prioritizing back end stuff and overheads is always a bit scary, but I'm with you on that. Um, so you talked about lack of segmentation by marketplace and by products. It's obviously really critical. Are there any sort of other errors related to lumping everything together rather than splitting them out?
Yeah, the chart of accounts is key. When you work with a new bookkeeping service, that make sure that you understand the chart of accounts. You don't have to set it up. You don't have to know the ins and outs of QuickBooks, but you should be able to look at the line items on your P&L and know what those accounts are, and it should make sense for your business. So that's why Shelia, who's our head financial controller, we made sure that she was an expert at chart of accounts. She has a great system that allows you to make tweaks, allows you to be customized to the client's business because everything's different, and also put it in a way that the average entrepreneur can understand. If you have a messy chart of accounts, everything else becomes more difficult and more confusing down the line. So get it set up correctly. Make sure that you understand what your chart of accounts is. And a good way to think of it is every time you spend on your credit card, you don't actually have to reconcile it, but in your head, you should know, hey, this is going to go into this expense category that we created because you know what your chart of accounts is.
Okay, that makes sense. And are there particular items that I know that when I look at my chart of accounts, there are some slightly confusing things under, assets or liabilities, which tends to enter into the balance sheet, which is less of a familiar territory for me than profit and loss statement, right? Which I guess most of us tend to veer towards. So, are there particular line items that you find people get confused about?
Yeah, I mean, the chart of accounts is very specific to the actual business. That's why we like to customize it. So it's not like there's one necessary line that confuses people. Our goal, let's take expenses, for example. Our goal is to not have like 7 pages of different chart of accounts where it gets so detailed, where every single expense fits in this very small subcategory of subcategories. But at the same time, you don't want just to say expenses and it's one big bulk that doesn't actually help you make decisions. You want it divided out between subscriptions, between different types of maybe warehouse expenses, stuff like that, so that you can see trends. Because when you're looking at these books, you want to be able to compare this month to last month, this month to the same month last year, assuming you've been in business for longer than a year. And you want to see, hey, is my payroll going up? Is my payroll going down? Are my computer expenses going up? Are they going down? And be able to look at that compared to sales, because a lot of people fall into the trap where maybe their margins over time are getting smaller. Their sales maybe are staying the same, but their expenses are starting to creep up. And you want to be able to recognize that early so you can make any adjustments needed.
Yeah, that's a very common thing, isn't it? They say the overhead walks on 2 legs, and over time, you add more and more staff to gradually do things, which probably includes a bookkeeper, ironically. But tell me more about that. Let's deal with that on the head. That's not very well put. Let's deal with that face to face, which is the thought that somebody listening might have right now, which is, okay, I get that in theory I should have nice clean books, but how do I justify the cost of a bookkeeper as adding to my overhead?
Yeah, I mean, there's 3 essential things you need in any business that you start, and there's no way around it. The first thing is a lawyer. You should have a lawyer. Second is a CPA, or in Europe, I'm not sure exactly what it's called, but someone to do your taxes, an accountant that handles the tax side. And then lastly is the actual bookkeeper. And we've always liked to divide it up between having a CPA, a tax person, and a bookkeeper in all of our businesses. And there's a lot of benefits to doing that. First of all, CPAs tend to be more expensive than bookkeepers. So having a CPA do your bookkeeping tends to be more expensive. Second of all, CPAs a lot of times are doing your books in a way for you to do your taxes at the end of the year. You can have accurate books that are right from a tax standpoint that don't give you the information you need every single month to really make decisions based on those numbers. And a lot of times they're not able to get that autopilot where it's month ends, books by the 15th, month ends, books by the 15th, because they have their busy seasons from March to April in the US, October as well. They fall behind on tax stuff, which delays the bookkeeping side. So being able to do that consistently becomes very hard for them. And lastly, it's great to have two minds working together. We like to have our CPA work with our bookkeeper and have the CPA lead the side on the tax strategies and collaborate. And to us, we get almost like a two-person team working together to get our books, to get our taxes right. And that's a kind of setup that you need. So for people thinking that they can't necessarily afford it, you don't necessarily have to go with a service. You can start small, you can upgrade later, but it's an essential part of any business. It's just like you have to pay Amazon fees. It's just like you have to pay that lawyer or someone to do your taxes. There's no way around it. A good bookkeeper long-term is going to help make you money because you're going to be able to make great decisions each month instead of just flying by the seat of your pants and making decisions based on gut.
Yeah, I guess it's the difference between, if you wanted to save a tiny bit of weight in your car, if you had like a really stripped down beach buggy or something. I'm getting out of my comfort zone because I've never driven a car like that, but you might be tempted to strip the speedometer out. But of course, then you have no idea whether you're breaking the law, and that's not a good plan. So yeah, and to your point about separating CPA, which in Britain, by the way, we call it a chartered accountant. So I don't know what it is in other countries, but it's a very, very good point. I mean, chartered accountants are really good at tax, and often they have no idea how to deal with the day-to-day operations of an e-commerce business, in my experience. And a lot of people I work with, mid six, even seven-figure sellers, they often will have an accountant that they've been with for years, and before they got into e-commerce, they've been used to them doing their annual accounts, and it turns out they're really the wrong person for that job. So I take your point on that. So look, obviously you guys are in the business of helping people with bookkeepers. You've implied already that you work multi-channel. So tell us a bit more about the services you guys offer at ecombalance as well. Who do you help and what do you do for them?
Yeah, so we have a 10-person bookkeeping team that knows e-commerce very well, a hybrid of US and a team in the Philippines. Team in the Philippines are a lot of times CPA equivalent, very high level bookkeepers. And our goal is to focus on monthly books. Now, if you're behind, we can help you do cleanup and catch up. If we're doing your monthly books, we can help you with add-on services, whether it's paying vendors, payroll, sales tax, stuff like that. But our core focus is the monthly book. So we want to make it as easy as possible for clients to get a quote. You fill out a pricing form and give us access to your current books. We get you a quote. Assuming you agree to that, we get the access we need. Our goal is to get view-only access to your account so that we don't have to bother you every single month for statements. We want to be able to pull information and to really understand your business so that we know what certain transactions are without coming to you. So once we get integrated, we hit the ground running, we deal with any cleanup or catch up work. And our goal is to get you on autopilot as quickly as possible, where we bill you on the 1st, you get your books by the 15th. With any business that Connor and I create, we have an extremely high level of customer service where you can email us, you can text us, you can call us, you can set up meetings. Our goal is to help you understand your books so you can have those financial meetings and make those decisions and open up opportunities for you to have a less stressful tax season, get investments or funding, sell your business if that's something you want to do. That's what Clean Books helps you do. So if anyone's listening, you get 2 free months of bookkeeping. Just mention this podcast when you go to sign up. And our goal is to really perfect this service. We're 6 months in, we've got about 50 clients right now and growing. And we want to really make this as hands-off as possible for our clients to make it sure that they know what's going on in their business.
Amazing. That's nice and clear. And so 50 people have gone on for that already. And you got a team of 10. So that you got quite a lot of strength in depth. So you're not going to get overwhelmed overnight, which is good to know. That's one of the things that happens with new service businesses, right? So that's very reassuring. And I believe, yeah, you've already said thank you very much. You were going to offer 2 free months, which is great. So mention the 10K Collective podcast or Amazing FBA, whichever one you remember, or Michael Veazey, that's me. I think you've also got some kind of reports or free downloadable as well, haven't you, for us?
Yeah, we have 2 things. So one, if you're wondering, how do I do this financial meeting every single month? We have a free PDF. Michael has the link of the exact agenda of the meeting, what we go through, what we look for, what decisions we make each month based on the numbers. And we also have sample reports. So if you're wondering, hey, if I use ecombalance, what do I get every single month? What does that package look like? We have sample reports that we put together so you could take a look. And I think our unique proposition and what we're really focused on is we're entrepreneurs first. We're e-commerce sellers first. We're not bookkeepers first. We hire great bookkeepers. Our bookkeepers are phenomenal, but we know what entrepreneurs like to see. We know how to speak entrepreneur, and we want our reports to reflect that, where the average person who doesn't consider themselves an expert at bookkeeping can really understand them and know how their business is doing and make decisions.
Yeah, fantastic. And you're so right. There is a different way that a CPA looks at things and a bookkeeper and an entrepreneur. What we want to do is translate numbers into actionable insights, I guess, right? And there's a whole art to that. So I like that a lot. And if you want to get those PDFs, so the exact agenda, how you're going to make decisions and sample reports, just go to amazingfba.com/ecom balance. That's ECO1M and then balance. So that's it. Really great stuff. We're going to talk briefly in our next episode about how to work with a bookkeeper, because I think that communication with somebody who lives kind of in a financial world, and as you said, an entrepreneur who thinks quite differently from most of the population, can be a bit of a challenge. But for the moment, just remains for me to say many, many thanks, Nathan, for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, good to go for the next one.
Yep, let's do it.
Here we go. Right, camera back to me.
So are you not live streaming this one?
This live, yeah. We're just breaking
cool.
it in the middle. So if you're watching on a live stream, this is what happens in the back end of the podcast. Feel free to pop your comments. I haven't seen any comments. I was about to say that sounds like I'm being rude, but I haven't seen any comments come in so far. But do feel free to put them in. Okay, here we go for the next one. Ladles and jelly spoons, boys and girls. Welcome back to the 10K Collective podcast, the place to be for 6, 7, and 8-figure Amazon and private label sellers. Now, obviously, e-commerce operators who sell on Amazon and other platforms as well. So today we are talking with Nathan Hirsch of ecombalance. Ecombalance helps e-commerce sellers to get clean books and thus make financially driven decisions, is my understanding of it. Nathan's a massively experienced entrepreneur. If you want to hear more about his story, then you can listen to the previous episode. Today, we're going to plunge straight into the question of how to actually work with a bookkeeper, how to communicate with a bookkeeper, which I have to say I have personal experience of, so I'd be interested to learn more. So Nathan, welcome back.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So bookkeepers and entrepreneurs, it seems to me sometimes they speak a slightly different language. So tell me what you see when that breaks down and how do we make it better?
Yeah, so that's been a big focus of mine for the past few months, because we want to really bridge that gap. We want to teach our bookkeepers to speak in a way that the average e-commerce entrepreneur can understand. And we also want to value the entrepreneur's time. So to us, it starts off with getting on the same page early. So assuming someone has gotten a quote from us and agrees to work with us, the next step is integration. So that's when we get view-only access to bank accounts, to credit cards, to marketplaces. And we want our team to take the time to go through it and to mark down things that they might have questions on before when we have our kickoff call. So that kickoff call is extremely important. That's a chance for clients to ask questions to our bookkeepers. It's a chance for clients to explain their business, things we should know, nuances, issues they've had in the past with other bookkeepers, and for my team to ask questions and get on the same page after we've already reviewed their accounts, their marketplaces, so that we know what's going on. From that kickoff call, that's when we actually get started on the books. And a lot of times when you get started on new books and you really dig in there, more questions come up. Things maybe were not discussed in the kickoff call or were left out. And those first 30 to 60 days are incredibly important to get to know the business and get to know the transactions of the business. And what we find is that 95% of the time, or 95% of transactions, we're going to learn. So if you charge something now or you charge something in 8 months, we're going to know where that is, where we don't need to ask you. Every once in a while, a client will drop 10K on something that's brand new that they've never done before, and we need clarification on what that is. But our goal is to take those first 30, 60, 90 days to really get on the same page. And as clients, you should really be trying to think of every possible bit of information that you can share with your bookkeeper. What does a good month look like? What does a bad month look like? What are metrics that are important to you? How many products do you sell? What marketplaces do you sell on? What are the nuances of those marketplaces? You might have businesses that are doing print on demand, that are paying vendors on net 90 terms, that are buying inventory in certain frequencies. These are all things that it's very important for a bookkeeper to know, and you want to be able to share that information quickly. So our goal is to take those 30, 60 days to really get on the same page, have strong communication via email, asking questions, keeping stuff in writing, so that after that, the amount of time that we have to actually reach out to our client is very small. So as an entrepreneur, that's kind of the mentality is there's a little bit of a setup, a little bit of a ramp up period. And the way that you make that faster and more efficient is by providing as much information as possible to your bookkeeper and asking questions.
Yeah, perfect. So you have to accept that there's a ramp up period. I think that's the, it sounds really obvious thing. And to a man who's, now on his third outsourcing based business, well, fourth, I guess, because your Amazon business was scaled through outsourcing, right? That might sound like an obvious thing, but a lot of people I know get to the point where they've got themselves and a business partner and maybe a couple of team members, and they're doing several $1 million a year already. And to really get used to the idea of hiring, particularly if it's remote, for a lot of people is a really big mental step. So what would you say are the errors that you see coming up with somebody who's in that kind of situation, and how do we deal with that?
Yeah. So, yeah, good question. So, in terms of the mental errors, I would go into the mentality that I would assume nothing. I would assume just that the bookkeeper understands e-commerce, but not that they necessarily understand your business, because there's lots of different e-commerce businesses out there. So, focus on what is your past, like how did you start this business, how did you grow it, where's your business currently at, and what are your future goals. So are you going to open up a Shopify store in the future? Are you planning on opening up other bank accounts? These are all things that your bookkeeper needs to know. And there's also a certain mentality on your side that you need to take. So first of all, not intermingling personal and business. That's something that we won't work with someone if they're doing that. And it's an absolute mess to clean up. If you're buying groceries with your business account, that's a big issue. Second is making sure you're using real business bank accounts and real business credit cards. The issue with using personal accounts, although technically you could have a personal account, you could have two personal accounts, one for personal and one for business. There's no way for a bookkeeper to get view only access to the personal checking account, even if it's used for business. So make it easy for your bookkeepers. Use banks like Mercury that make it easy for bookkeepers to get access to, and make sure it's set up as a business account. So there's a little bit of setup and mentality that you need to have that, hey, before I pass it over to a bookkeeper, I want to make it as easy as possible. But then there's that sharing of information where it's, hey, what should this bookkeeper know about my past, current, and future to help to put them in position to succeed in doing my books?
Okay, so that is an excellent question. So I'm going to kind of point it back at you and say, what should your bookkeeper know? What sort of things do they actually need to know? You mentioned future past goals and opening in a whole new marketplace. I guess, what other things do they need to know that often get left out if you're not careful?
Yeah, all the bank accounts, all the credit cards, all the processors, all the loans that you might have. Those are things that they need to know. So make sure that you're able to easily list that out. That's one of the reasons we go through integration, because here and there a client will be like, oh, I forgot to tell you about this Chase card that I use for XYZ. So make sure that you list all those out. Make sure that if there's any large purchases, so purchases over $5,000 or $10,000, that you tell people about those, because a lot of times those have to be depreciated. You might have bought a warehouse. You might have bought a large quantity of inventory. You might have bought one of those, it's not a tractor, I'm forgetting the word, but those carts for the warehouse that you spend $5,000 on that we need to know about. So think about any large purchases. Also, like, how are you buying inventory? Are you buying it more wholesale? Are you buying it every quarter? Are you on certain terms with your vendors? We don't necessarily need to know every little detail, but those things are incredibly important for the bookkeepers. And lastly, what marketplaces you sell on. Is it Amazon Europe? Is it just Amazon US? Making sure that's super clear for any bookkeeper so that nothing's missed.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense as well. Great. Well, look, as usual with you, I always feel like after about 5 minutes, you've answered all the questions that a person could have. What are the other questions that come up in those initial calls that you have, either a sort of sales call or discovery call, if you call it that, or your sort of initial onboarding call, whatever you call that? What are the questions that the entrepreneurs ask at that point?
Yeah, well, you brought it up in the last podcast that most entrepreneurs don't understand. They don't like the balance sheet, and they want to ignore that and just focus on the P&L. The balance sheet is incredibly important. Having starting balances, having vendor balances, these are all things that the bookkeeper needs to know. I would make sure to put your bookkeeper in contact with your accountant. It's one of the things we get during integration, your accountant's information. We're only going to reach out to them with your permission, but we want to be on the same page so that everything that we're doing from a bookkeeping standpoint matches exactly what's on your tax return. And that's important for the balance sheet, but it's also important for your business setup and your partnerships. A lot of times you might say, hey, it's a 50-50 partnership, but that's not what it says on your tax return. And we need to be able to match it up there. So making sure that we're able to see previous tax returns, that we're in communication with your accountant, that your balance sheet, that we can get up to date as quickly as possible. Those are extra things to focus on during those first 30 days.
Yeah, that's really good advice. And the final thing on the balance sheet, since you brought it up, and I know you're not a CPA or a bookkeeper, but you're a savvy entrepreneur, financially literate entrepreneur, I would say. Let's put it that way. So, in your experience, what are the missing bits of information that if we use a good bookkeeper and have good reporting, we can learn from? How can it inform our decision making?
Yeah, a lot of it is the starting balances because the balance sheet is essentially a snapshot of your assets versus liabilities. And if the starting balances are wrong, then everything else is going to be wrong. So that's kind of my biggest tip is to make sure that we have good, clean starting balances, make sure that your accountant has those balances and that they're not ignoring your balance sheet so that you can get a good snapshot of where your business is at and essentially the health.
Yeah, that makes sense. So you're going to make sure it's accurate. So I guess the question I'm asking is, if you're sitting down with your bookkeeper, because you guys own multiple businesses, and you are having that monthly meeting, what does the balance sheet help? How does the balance sheet help you in your decision making?
Yeah, a big focus of it is on inventory. So you can know, hey, this is what I have on hand. These are my current assets. Obviously, it's going to show you if you have a negative account health, if your liabilities are just drastically ahead of your assets there. But you also, a lot of the businesses that I've run, like FreeUp, for example, there was no warehouse, there was no office, there was no inventory. So businesses like that end up being a lot less complex when you're an e-commerce seller and you might have a lot of different assets that you need to know the value of. You need to be able to monitor and see how that's changing on a month-to-month basis. And a lot of times it helps you point out red flags too, where you're like, hey, we have too much inventory, whatever it is, or our liabilities are starting to stack up. So that's kind of how I would look at it. It's tough to kind of give a, hey, this is what you should do in every possible situation, because that balance sheet is one of those things that's very customized depending on what your business is and how you're running it.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I guess this is why you got to employ experts really in such matters. So let's get to the point where you tell us how you help people with this. So obviously you've got a very clear onboarding and ramping up process, which you've gone through, and that's obviously a great way to minimize errors in communication. So if people want to get started with you, what services do you offer? Oh, and one thing I ought to ask, which I didn't ask in the last episode first, which marketplaces do you deal with? Obviously Amazon, which is the focus of this podcast, but what are the other marketplaces or D2C sites?
Yeah, we work with all e-commerce marketplaces, whether it's BigCommerce, WooCommerce, Shopify, eBay, Amazon. We have sellers that sell on all of them.
Great, that's useful to know. And yeah, so what do you actually do for people as well? What are the services?
Yeah, our core focus is monthly bookkeeping. Charge you on the first, getting you accurate income statement, balance sheet, cash flow statement on time every single month so that you can make good decisions. We can help you clean up and catch up your books. If we're doing your monthly books, we can help you with add-on services like AR, AP, sales tax, payroll. But our core service is that monthly books for e-commerce sellers. And if you go to ecombalance.com, you can quickly get a quote and hopefully move forward. We kind of talked about what integration looks like, but mention this podcast, get 2 free months of bookkeeping, and getting a quote is as simple as filling out a quick form and sending us access to your current books.
Yeah, fantastic. And I know that we've also got some useful PDFs as well about a couple of things. So what to look for in your monthly meeting, what the exact agenda should be, the meeting with your bookkeeper, which you've stressed so much, which makes sense, how to make decisions, and some sample reports. So those are amazing, fba.com/ecom balance. So as usual, Nathan, I've said this to people before about you that when I interview you, unlike everyone else, I feel like you get to the chase so efficiently, like we're done in 10 minutes, which is a really useful thing when you got somebody working with busy entrepreneurs. Is there any other question that I didn't ask you that I should have?
No, I think we covered a lot. I know you said 10 minutes, but it's been a good 50 minutes or so. And my goal is to not dive into the technicality of the bookkeeping because I don't think entrepreneurs need to know that, but entrepreneurs do need to know what that setup should look like, what a good setup looks like. And obviously the other stuff we talked about, like errors and common mistakes with bookkeeping and how to do it the wrong way. So you need to know enough to be dangerous. You need to know what a good setup looks like, but you don't need to actually know how to technically do stuff in QuickBooks.
Yeah, how not who, right? That's the classic thing that we're talking about here. Don't work out how to deal with QuickBooks because there are so many details. I've tried to do it myself, and I repeatedly get cheapskate and try to do my own reconciling and then give up, but and go and hire somebody because it's never worth it. You're right. So getting stuck in the detail. Final thing then is just for me to say many thanks, Nathan. I think this is like the third business that I've been talking to you about in the e-commerce space, which is very impressive. May not be the last, but it's certainly really critical. And I think I know so many sellers that really need something like this. So go check it out, guys. Ecom with one M, ecombalance.com. Mention the 10K Collective podcast or the Amazing FBA podcast. And Nathan, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your wisdom.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, folks listening live or watching on the replay, do remember to put in some comments below the video if you have any questions about bookkeeping for e-commerce. Not should I start a retail arbitrage business, so not how do I do bookkeeping for my real estate empire in New York. No, just about e-commerce. And with that, we better let you get back to your life in Colorado, Nathan. How is Colorado these days? You've been there a couple of years now, haven't you?
Yeah, Colorado's great. Loving the outdoor life. My wife and I just became foster parents, so that's
Oh,
been
wow.
exciting. We have
Congratulations.
a kid coming tomorrow, hopefully. So I know we're both really excited about that. And
Yeah.
yeah, it's been good. It's been a fun change of scenery.
Excellent. Well, you're in good company. Peter Zion's just moved out that way as well, hasn't he? The guru of sort of geopolitics. Yeah, great. Well, look, thank you so much for coming on live with us, and thank you very much for those of you watching